Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week, we're coming at you with a big-ass episode. We're going to be talking about two new albums, mainly, and we're also going to be talking about two other albums and some shorter segments that are a bit more abridged. But in the main segment today, we're going to be talking about the new album from indie rock veterans Cab for Cutie, their new album Asphalt Meadows. And of course we're going to be talking about the new album from the Mars Volta.
Yeah, we woke up in 2005.
I know, right? Like, what the fuck? This has happened so many times this year. I don't know which way is up, which way is down, but we're going to be talking about the Mars Volta self-titled. Can't believe we're going to be talking about another one of our favorite bands.
Yeah.
We've done an entire discography episode on the Mars Volta.
No.
That's one of the first videos we did as a Jams and Tea podcast. And I think that of the early era of that really rudimentary era, I think that's still one of the videos that holds up the best from like the really early days, because I don't think I would do very much different with anything that we said in that now.
I still remember your Bedlam and Goliath segment where you came in. It absolutely will not stop until you are dead.
Yeah,
which memorable.
For sure.
And on the abridged segments today, we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Rina Sawayama. We're going to be talking about Hold the Girl, and we're also going to be talking about the Beths, New Zealand power pop band, the Beths. We're going to be talking about Expert in a Dying Field. So with the exception of Rina, we're just completely talking about people we've talked about a long time ago.
Oh yeah. And Rina, we came so close to covering her album. We just started the podcast a couple of months too late. But yes, it's been a quiet week on the channel this week, mainly because my PC fucked itself and I had to get it repaired. So I wasn't able to edit videos. But we did get a main episode up where Jake and I discussed the new albums from Built to Spill and Preoccupations. Those were really, really fun albums to talk about. Pretty like lean and quick segments, but I think really, really worth it. We also had a great conversation we basically talked about the entire One O Tricks Point Never discography in that episode, as well as some other really, really cool records as well. So check that out if you haven't already. It's a nice quick one, but we're back with a force today. It's the four of us, and then August will be tagging in for Connor for the Mars Volta. So you're going to get a lot of voices today, and it's going to be a really, really fun one. Plus, we are coming at you on Wednesday with a record club on Queens of the Stone Age's Songs for the Deaf, which we've had recorded for a while now, but it's finally going to be seeing the light of day in celebration of that record's 20th anniversary. So stick around for that. Plus, of course, next Friday, we're going to be having the continuation of our national retrospective, where we're going to be talking about High Violet, and I'm very excited for that as well. So plenty coming up in the pipeline as well. But if there's anything you want us to talk about, anything you're excited for, please let us know in the comments below. However, now is the time where we talk about what we have been listening to for the past 7 days or longer, depending on how long it's been since you were last on the podcast. Jake, what have you been listening to?
I've been meaning to get more into this discography because I was such a big fan of this album initially. Talked about it a couple of weeks ago. I finally got around to listening to From Filthy Tongues of Gods and Griots by Dalek. I enjoyed their album Absence a couple of weeks ago. That's probably the best hip-hop album I've heard all year, and this is like the Dalek album, so I wanted to build to it accordingly. And woo, Nelly, this album is a ride, and at times a deeply fucking unpleasant one. Absence is an album that I like a little bit more just because it's a bit more of an exercise in the fundamentals of their sort of horrorcore industrial hip-hop kind of thing. This, on the other hand, it's easy to see why this is the sort of emblem for this band, because this is like a more holistic portrait of their sound. So there's more like purely atmospheric noise core fucking crazy shit on here, and it's just deeply fucking unsettling. It's heavy as hell. It's occasionally like just super fucking abrasive, and it's like really, really atmospheric, really dense. it has a really strange flow to it, but I got into its groove. But I mean, it is a capital G great record. It's just like it's kind of hard not to sort of buckle under an album like that's weight upon first listening to it. I have a feeling that'll be a bit of a grower, but nonetheless, god damn, that's woo, that was fun. That was the first listen I had to on a night this week, and I was just like, I'll just kick it off with some of this, and then like 20 minutes into it, I was like just because of us covering Death Cab for Cutie this week, a band that I surprisingly am not very well versed in. I had only heard Plans up until this week. So I wanted to change that a little bit because I loved Plans. I talked about it on the show whenever the fuck I listened to it. I don't remember when, probably sometime at the beginning of last year. However, I finally listened to the Death Cab for Cutie album, Transatlanticism, and in a very different kind of way, it was also an album that 20 minutes into it, I was like, fuck you, Ben Gibbard, you fucking piece of shit.
The glove compartment is inaccurately named.
No!
And everybody knows it.
I love how like that album sort of starts with like four or five kind of like sort of jaunty, sort of emo tinged banger songs, and then you just get to Tiny Vessels onwards, and it just becomes the most fucking just
Tiny
painful
Vessels
album you've ever heard in your life.
I knew this album's reputation, so I didn't go into it totally unprepared. But I listened to those first couple songs, and it's like, they're not, joyous or anything, but I was still like, all right, I think I know what I'm kind of in for here. Then the back half of that record just fucking destroys you. It's just this, like, again, especially if you've ever been in a long distance relationship, this album is the kryptonite to my Superman. It resurfaced a lot of old painful feelings and memories. And it also doesn't help that Ben Gibbard, especially like right in this particular era, Ben Gibbard just really sounds like Elliott Smith. So it has a lot of musical signifiers that like harken back to my younger years of listening. So it feels like I fully regressed into my late teenage self when listening to this, which is both the highest compliment I can give it and also a reason why I maybe will probably wait a little while to listen to it again. It's a masterful record. I adore it. There's not a miss there. I'd say that like, that and Plans are still kind of vying for my number one spot. I sort of feel like Transatlanticism as an album experience is like the better record, but I like the songs on Plans more. So like I have them both rated at like a 9. I would probably reach to save Plans first if my house was on fire.
Look,
but
I talked about
meaningless
this last
designation
week when I talked about the Afghan Wigs, where they have Gentleman and Black Love, and they're like two albums right next to each other, and they're both perfect, and you can't pick one over the other. And
No.
I called it the dichotomy of Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets.
Exactly.
It's the same thing, and that's what those two albums are in Death Cab's discography as well. Sometimes a band will just do 2 consecutive albums where it's like a fiery debate about which one fans prefer because they're both so untouchable. And yeah, and I was thinking about this week because yesterday I listened to 5 Death Cab albums. I just kind of went on a binge. And I was thinking about Death Cab, and I'm probably not the first person to say this, but Death Cab are the quintessential iPod band. Like, if you had an iPod in the 2000s, you had a Death Cab for Cutie album on that iPod at some point, and it was most likely either Transatlanticism or Plans, but they're both essential iPod core records. And I associate Transatlanticism specifically, which has always been my favorite Death Cab album, with the period where I graduated from an MP3 player to an iPod for the first time. And that was just one of those albums that I was really, that was just happened to be a big part of that period of my teenage years. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to take.
They're a premium millennial band to me because Morgan and I in high school, we had our media arts teacher, and she, her favorite band was Death Cab for Cutie. And so like I remember just like the feeling I got when I like, me, a completely musically illiterate teenager, when she just said her favorite band was Death Cab for Cutie. And I was just like, what the goddamn fuck is a Death Cab for Cutie? What the shit? And so like I have it associated in my head, just like this band is forever linked to a early 30s-year-old lesbian teacher of ours who was instrumental in introducing many different great films to us over the years.
Jake,
so I have a
have you-
weird fondness for the band.
Have you ever listened to their Postal Service, Jake? Stupid question.
I have actually.
Alright.
That was the first thing of Ben Gibbard's I listened to, ironically. I really like that album, but I prefer Death Cab's sort of all-encompassing sound. I feel like calling them an emo band is kind of like calling The World Is a Beautiful Place an emo band, in that their sound is so expansive and draws from so many different things that it feels like that's just kind of not enough.
Well, the thing
but
is,
I
like,
still haven't listened to their other records, like
Yeah.
Photo Album and stuff that like I'm going to get to. But like Death Cab are a band that like in my head they're like Modest Mouse, and that they have like a run of albums that are basically essential, and then like the second half of their career is just like nobody gives a shit, like just not a single person, except for you, Riley, because of course you do.
I only think look,
Well-
I think it's just the last couple of albums that have been not great. I'm basically
Mhm.
right for everything else. But I will say, what was I gonna say? Just fucking it doesn't matter, it's gone. You were saying, Connor.
Well, I haven't heard the something about airplanes, although I've heard a couple tracks from them and really like them. But I can say for certain that stretch from We Have the Facts and We're Voting Yes
That's
to,
another one.
is it Narrow Stairs?
Mhm.
Yeah, that
Yes.
stretch right there is like gold in my opinion. It like a lot of people just focus on transatlanticism and plans because they're the big ones, but like there's just so many essential songs on that whole stretch.
Yeah,
right there.
I revisited Narrow Stairs yesterday, and that album was just like in my head, that was like, oh yeah, it's an uneven album with some great songs. And like I was listening to it, it's like, you know what? There's actually not a single song on here that I would call
I know.
this. It's like great. It's from front to back. It's just fantastic. Anyway, we'll get to more Death Cab very shortly. Jay, what else have you been listening to?
I guess the emo adjacent sound continues. I have a small, tiny little story that's very strange happening this week, and that I haven't really listened to Jimmy Eat World in a while. So I wanted to go back just because, that's a band that we all bond over liking to some extent. And I had been meaning to revisit Clarity for a while now anyway, and I just haven't been able to.
Death
But-
Cab for Cutie and Jimmy Eat World are like the left and right hand of 2000s, like early 2000s, like indie emo rock music. They're just
It's like
they
I
go
got
together.
a view into an alternate world of myself that was my age when these albums came out. So that was really strange. But I also downloaded and listened to their EP Stay on My Side Tonight. Or did I? Here's the funny story. Okay, so I've been, going
Okay,
through
because I
EPs a
thought
lot.
that rating was awful fucking weird.
See, and you'll notice that I took that rating down. So here's the funny story, is that I went to download these albums, right? And I went to download Clarity, I went to download Futures, went to download, Stay on My Side Tonight. And I noticed that you and Riley really highly rated this EP, and it's bolded on Rate Your Music, if I remember correctly. So I was just like, I've been needing to get to this for a long time anyway. Perfect. And so I listened, it was the first thing I listened to on one of my shifts this week. And I put it on, and I was just kind of like, the first song was playing, I was like, damn, this is 8 minutes. Holy shit. And I was like, some Goodbye Sky Harbor shit gonna happen? And then like halfway into the track, I was like, is that it? Is that all this song is? And I was really confused. And I was just like, that was 8 minutes of like nothing. It wasn't even emo music. It felt like a dance beat. What the fuck? And then I just kept listening. And every single song, no vocals, none, There was not nary an emo adjacent pop punk song on there. It was nothing but like dollar store burial instrumentals. And like I finished listening to it.
Where
and
did you
like
find this?
And here's where I get to the center of the mystery, is that I was just like, I was listening to it and I was just like, for a solid hour at work, I was having an internal crisis. I was just like I even saw Connor's comment on the fucking Rate Your Music page talking about one of the songs in the latter half that was just like, this is one of the best songs of all time. And I looked at it and I was just like, what are you fucking talking about? And I was just like, Morgan 5-star, what's happening? And so I go home.
What are you talking about?
Exactly. So I go home and I look and I'm just like, the time codes of this track listing it matches up completely. And then I go on SoulSeek to download another version of it. Somebody just put a version of this EP on SoulSeek to fuck with people. It's just nothing but instrumentals. And I was just like, why did Jimmy, for an hour of my life, I was like, why did Jimmy Eat World just make this? What is this? Like I remember Morgan at one point in the past.
You got LimeWired. You got LimeWired in 2022.
Yeah, you did.
Morgan at one point said, he was just like, if they made an album that sounded like Stay on My Side Tonight, that would be my favorite Jimmy Eat World album. Imagine my fucking shock when I finished that EP and I was like, really, dude? That would be your favorite? More than Futures? Are you sure about that?
I mean, that album is Futures, surely.
Yeah. And so then I go back and download another version of it, and then I skip forward in the track, and I'm just like, okay, that's Jim Adkins. What the fuck?
The titular Jimmy.
I had that happen to me, which was real weird. But I also did re-listen to Clarity alongside that, which thankfully was not full of like lo-fi beats to study to, thankfully. First, I listened to something that I think will make Riley very happy, and that I listened to Adrianne Lenker's Songs, her sort of dual songs and instrumental project that dropped in 2020. One of the songs, Anything, made it on our best songs of the year list.
It did.
And I'd only heard that song until that point. And obviously, since I was such a big fan of the new Big Thief album, and I had the only other album of theirs I've heard was Two Hands, which I similarly absolutely fucking love. I'm like, I should listen to more of their shit. But the idea of just like an Adrianne Lenker solo project that's like really folk oriented, very pastoral, very simple, but very like beautiful and amazingly recorded. I was just like, that's just what I need at the end of my shift tonight, man. And I put that on. That's a terrific little album. I think it forecasts a lot of what they would do on Dragon New Orm Mountain in a lot of ways. I mean, the title to the album is mentioned on one of the songs even.
Yeah.
But it's such a beautiful record. Adrianne's songwriting is, as always, really stellar. The way she talks about interpersonal relationships and family, and there's always like a darkness in her music that isn't like immediately apparent, that like I feel like alludes to some sort of like central trauma in her life that she never really like unpacks, but still allows to inform a lot of her music, that I think is really compelling. And this is, again, it's just a very beautifully recorded series of songs. I will listen to instrumentals eventually, just because I remembered thinking it multiple times where I was just like, I would totally listen to these songs without the lyrics, just because they do sound so
what I
pretty.
recommend doing is listening to them together, because the very end of the last song kind of just runs into the start of instrumentals, and they kind of just transition into each other. Yeah, also just because I think Songs is a weird record in the sense that it's very understated, and so it kind of sneaks up on you a little bit. Like the first time I heard it, I was like, this is some really powerful songs. And now I'm just in the place where it's like, I think my favorite solo artist folk album ever. Like, I've heard this upwards of 50 times. I've just put it on so many times and just let it run through from start to finish. I think that Adrianne's songwriting is unbelievably good here. I mean, there's songs like, again, Anything, one of the greatest love songs of the last 10 years. You have a song like Ingy Dar, which would fit right in on Nick Drake's Pink Moon.
One of the songs in the latter half of the track list that is the word family in that song.
It could be, yeah, it could be Karma, it could be Zombie Girl, or Not a Lot, Just Forever, which is one of my
Not a
favorite
Lot,
songs.
Just Forever. That was one of my, oh God, fuck, that was so good.
Yeah.
Jesus
That
Christ.
song off of the back of Zombie Girl and then into Dragon Eyes, which is amazing. Just an incredible record. Yeah, I'm stoked you like that. I mean, that shit's just, I just weep at this point.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I was like immediately over the moon about, but like the more I think about it and digest it, the more I'm just like, oh, I really want to listen to this again. And I have a feeling that it's just one of those grower albums that, you know, can sometimes kind of blindside you. So I'm looking forward to living with that a little bit and checking out the second half, technically speaking. I also listened to a new project, getting ahead of the curve a little bit because it was released like the day we're recording this. But I listened to, I've mentioned another album that they've made this year on one of these segments, Death's Dynamic Shroud, their album Transcendence Bot, which is one of my favorite albums of the year, which is terrific still. I still spin that every once in a while just because it's a really tight, compact listen. And I listened to another one of their projects that they released this year, which was, it's got some long fucking Fiona Apple ass title, but it was decent. But there's been a particular release that a lot of people have been anticipating just because the singles they've been dropping have been like uniformly excellent. And I learned a little bit more about this band and project in discovering this, and that Death's Dynamic Shroud is 3 separate musicians and it's their collective project, but it's kind of like Animal Collective in that sometimes they'll have just 2 of them on an album, sometimes it'll just be 1, but very rarely, or maybe for the first time, their new album Dark Life is a collaboration between the 3 main musicians. And I think that this is either the first time that's happened or the first time in a very long while that it's happened. So learning that was really interesting, and that sort of gave me a bit of a guiding light to explore some of their other more highly acclaimed albums and like what to expect from them. So I listened to Dark Life, and in the Excel sheet where I have listed all of the albums that I listen to, because of course I catalog all of my albums and what I listen to because I have list brain. My rating for this is literally a question mark, and it has nothing to do with the fact that whether or not I think it's good or bad. I enjoyed myself heavily with this album, but it's also like, fucking what? Like this album legitimately feels like it obeys its own musical language. There's so many different, like, there's like fucking synth electro pop bangers on here. There's a beautiful piano medley on here. There's like fucking break beat ass, like really tight, intense instrumental passages. There's sampling all over this thing. None of these tracks feel like they have any rules. You just listen to them and it's just like listening to a piece of music mutate. And like some of them start off really angular and rigid and then just propel into becoming more organic and weird, and sometimes it's the opposite effect. And they're like, there might be a narrative on this album too. I think it's really more of an emotional thing, but there are lots of allusions to like direct storytelling beats. There's like an entire song on here that conceptually is about like a post-apocalyptic world where humans are like holing up in a mine shaft and being like massacred by robots, and the whole song takes place from the perspective of someone in the mine shaft like calling out for help, but the story like doesn't resolve or anything, so you're just kind of left to have the music tell the rest of the story. This is easily one of the most interesting albums I've listened to this year, and I really liked it, but to the point where I'm just like, this could easily be like just being overwhelmed on something by first listen, to the point where this could be like an incredibly interesting musical project from this year that I would say is essential that you hear once, but doesn't have like the greatest staying power or anything. Or this could be one of my 10 favorite albums of the year. I have no fucking idea. I just know that I can't wait to go back and listen to it, because you do genuinely feel like you're on a roller coaster ride of just like perfectly orchestrated sampling madness. I like, you could listen to it and be totally underwhelmed. I'm trying not to overhype it, but it is a incredibly just like overpowering experience. There's parts of it that feel like, you know, the sampled kind of cyber metal quality that Transcendence Bot has, but also it feels like IDM by way of sampling. And it's just that this shit is nuts. And I have never been more convinced to like go back and listen to some of their older records, just because if they've been like, regardless of whether or not I end up thinking this is like one of the best albums of the year, these guys are capable of like, just they take all of these elements from stuff like vaporwave music and the sort of sampling. Like I talked about One O Tricks Point Never last week, and how the Chuck Person's Echo Jams felt a little bit primitive to me, and how I didn't really get a whole lot out of that project. This feels like the logical endpoint of that area of music, where you just take that and you write your own Rosetta Stone for weird contemporary music. It's got a moment on here for everybody. It's so fucking strange, but
Wow.
I loved the experience of listening to it, and I hope that I will love the album with time that much as well.
I mean, yeah, this album's had my attention for a while. I've heard people hyping this up, hyping the singles up. And of course, typical of Rate Your Music, this website has absolutely fucking bust their entire load for this album already. It has a 4.07 from nearly 500 ratings.
Woo!
So, you know,
that'll...
we'll see. I'm very curious to check this out. I'm going to be listening to it very soon. What have I been listening to? I think I only have one. Okay, I've got two new things I want to shout out. They're not both new releases, but I'll start with the new release, which is the new collaborative EP from Parannoul and Asian Glow, Paraglow. What else would it be called? Following on the heels of the collaborative EP from Asian Glow and Weather Day, which is called, say it with me kids, Weather Glow. We have this now collaborative EP from Parannoul.
I guess it could have been called the Asian Newell.
I don't think it could. It's very much the whole spirit of this whole niche of music and these group of artists is that they're very friendly with each other and very collaborative. So this is no surprise that this has happened. And also insanely prolific as well. I mean, it feels like it was just yesterday, really, that we were reviewing the new Asian Glow record, which I still love. I still think is one of the best shoegaze records of the year. And I mean, this EP it's exactly what you would expect. It holds up. It's great. 4 great songs. The first 3 are pretty good. The last one, though, is a 15-minute track called Wheel, and that shit is bonkers. I mean, it's both of these artists kind of pushing themselves to a new sort of stratosphere of sound, essentially. Like, it starts off very, very familiar, I guess, to what you would expect from these two artists, but the place that it ends up in is like, it's kind of like their Untitled 8, to make another Sigur Rós reference. Ooh. Like, the way that song progresses and the way that song ends is very similar to the way that Wheel progresses and ends. And I think everyone who's a fan of either artist will find it satisfying. But yeah, the whole EP works really, really well as a whole. A strong recommendation from me. Go and check it out. Not, I mean, it's like, I don't even know if it's the best EP that either artist has released this year. I mean, because Parannoul released the White Ceiling EP early this year, which is really great. And Asian Glow, of course, that Weather Day collaborative EP is really, really good too. So just lots of great music. Listen to it. Otherwise, you will fail to be able to keep up, essentially. Listen to it or you'll fall behind, because they're going to be back with something new in about a fucking month's time. I'm sure of it.
Crazy kids.
But they are absolutely...
I have fallen behind.
The other thing I want to shout out this week, an album that I checked out because this particular artist had a new record out last week that was shouted out on IndieCast, and the way that they described this band really, really appealed to me. It was like an indie rock band that essentially do things that no other indie rock band do and never make the same album twice. Like, genre diverse, bending, really, really creative band. The band's called Young Jesus, which is like such a funny name for an indie rock band.
Young Jesus.
MC Young Jesus.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does make one think of Young Jeezy. Shout out to that very, very 2000s
Shout out
niche
to that man.
reference.
I saw your rating for that, and for some reason I thought I read it as Slim Jesus. If you remember Slim Jesus.
I have no idea who the fuck that is.
August's MC
man.
Skinny Penis.
No, but Young Jesus. All right, so they've put out a few records now, and they are I think art rock is a better way of describing them than indie rock. And apparently the new record is a completely new sort of synthetic electronic pop thing. But anyway, listen to their 2020 album, Welcome to Conceptual Beach. This is a 7-song album, 45 minutes. The last 2 songs are both upwards of 10 minutes. This thing is, I was floored, right? So I don't even know how to describe this. It's art rock. It's a bit jazz fusion. It's a bit soul. The singer is, how do I even describe his voice? He sounds a bit like a fusion of Jeff Buckley and Tim Buckley. He's kind of like the meeting point of those two men. He has a very distinct vocal style, but it's like incredibly beautiful. Like he's really, really great at singing. And the arrangements are so like warm and like they're slow building, but they just really like pull you in. And it has a kind of sweet feel to it as well. All of the songs do sort of run together. And then it climaxes with those kind of, if there's one thing, like one of my favorite things you can do as an artist to possibly get me on board with your album, it's end with 2, let's put the 2 longest songs on your album at the very end, back to back. It's the illusory walls effect at this point. Let's name it, because there'll never be a greater example than that. But it's also what Jimmy Eat World do on Invented, which is their most underrated album that I also revisited this week. A number of, like, whenever an artist does this, puts 2 really long songs at the very end of the record, I'm almost guaranteed to just completely buy in, because I love that as an aesthetic gambit. I love it, especially when you pull it off. And Young Jesus absolutely pulled it off on this record. This record is gorgeous. It's just absolutely beautiful. And if the idea of an art rock record that is colored with tinges of jazz fusion and more than a little bit of like Frank Ocean influence kind of dazzling in there a little bit, check it out. It flies by. It's a really quick record. It's a really creative record. It was an instant 9 for me, one of my favorite records I've heard this year. Completely head over heels for it. And I think that other people, that you guys, specifically all 3 of you, will find this record really, really enjoyable to varying degrees, if not outright love, because there's just so much creativity here. And it's like his voice is so fucking beautiful, man. It's good. It's good shit. And it resolves very satisfyingly as well. Great album experience. If you want to like listen to an album experience, as stupid as that can sound, but you know what I mean, put this one on. You won't regret it.
First thing I want to shout out is actually a jazz record, and it's mainly because of one of my guitar students who wanted to learn a song off of this album, and that is, of course, Undercurrent by Bill Evans and Jim Hall.
Ooh.
Legendary piano player, legendary guitarist coming together and just playing together, doing the classics, doing a lot of classic jazz standards, songs like My Funny Valentine, Skating in Central Park, which is so fucking beautiful. Listen to that track.
The album cover to this looks like a Cocteau Twins EP, and like
oh hell
the
yeah,
album's from like 62, and the album looks like a fucking like mid 80s dream pop sort of Dead Can Dance fucking sort of shit. It's such a funny contrast. It's not what I would expect from this kind of record.
Or like a Porcupine Tree single cover.
You don't look at that album cover and think cool jazz.
It could even work as like a black gaze type thing. Yeah. Like I could see that. Like it could. The point is, it could look like any other cover except for a cool jazz record.
I really need to listen to some of Bill's actual albums because I'm really only familiar with his Miles Davis stuff. But he's obviously a legend, so this is
a good
excuse.
Are you talking about Waltz for Debbie?
That's the one. I wanted to say Waltz with Debbie, but I knew that wasn't right. That album,
that's a good ass album,
a masterpiece.
Last week I saw a legendary band, perhaps you could call them the grandfathers of emo, which is of course the band Sunny Day Real Estate.
Ooh.
The thing is, I've been a big fan of them for a while, but mainly only their debut, Diary, because that is like in many ways the king of emo right there. It really paved the way for nearly every other band that came after it. And for the first time, I listened to their second album, which is called LP2 or just self-titled. They sometimes call it the Pink album because it's just a pink like cover with their name in tiny print. It's really good, although not quite on par with Diary for me. It just kind of continues more on that sound that they were going for, although it doesn't feel quite as tight or inventive, but it's still really good. But the main thing that really impressed me was their third album, which is called How It Feels to Be Something On. And this is a fantastic record, and it almost doesn't even sound like the same band. It's like it kind of takes a bit more of a like post-rock and even like art rock approach to the writing, the melodies, the timing. And I still don't know how to say his name. Jeremy Enig.
I just say Enig.
Enig. Yeah. His delivery is very different, and he almost sounds British in some places with his inflections, but not like corny. It like still really works. A lot of the instrumentally, it reminded me a lot of a band like Me Without You, and I'm wondering if this was like an influence on them, although of course without the spoken shouted delivery that they often do. But it has these very tight grooves and dark, almost brooding instrumentals with the guitar work and the bass work. It's really nice. Songs like Pillars that's one of the best songs that they ever wrote.
My hot take, I've seen that I'm not the only person who thinks this. It's kind of becoming more and more common if a take to see is I actually think that this is better than Diary. Although they're pretty well matched, I think. I find myself nowadays, or like in more recent years, I guess, since Diary was much more of a I'm 15 years old album. I come back to this one a bit more. I actually just think it's front to back a little bit more consistently engaging, whereas my favorite songs on Diary are like right at the start and right at the end, whereas this just really kind of it just keeps me engaged the entire time. Also, I think that some of the best songs are kind of in the midsection as well. I think that the title track, Guitar and Video Games, The Prophet, which is weirdly underrated on that web's on Rate Your Music for some reason. I really enjoy this album from front to back. I think it's great.
Yeah, I love those tracks too, and it has a phenomenal closer as well.
Yeah, Days Were Golden, amazing song.
Oh yeah, incredible. They ended the show with that, and that was phenomenal.
That's sick.
Yeah, they actually did way more songs from this album than they did from Diary, which was kind of surprising. But I can kind of see it because it's a bit more of a mature and
it's
darker
kind of
sounding record.
It's kind of has become like a little bit of a fan favorite record. Like I see in really like the really hardcore emo circles, I feel like I see people talking about this album more. It's just kind of had a bit of a resurgence in more recent years.
Just one last thing I'll quickly shout out, which is for the past like year, I've been a bit on a metalcore binge because I love metalcore, maybe my favorite style of metal,
maybe my favorite core.
Yeah, there you go. So I've been trying to listen to all of the classics or like any highly rated metalcore albums that I find on Rate Your Music, and one of them I found is one that I've been aware of, but I never listened to it until now because it kind of has a weird title and band name and album cover combination. And this album is called Buster by the band Admiral Angry. It sounds hilarious. And apparently it was the only album the band ever put out. And I think that the guitarist, who was the founder of the band, I think he actually unfortunately passed away from cystic fibrosis. I didn't say that right. Cystic fibrosis at like a really young age, like 22 or something like that, which is really sad. But anyway, I listened to this, and let me tell you something. I've heard many heavy albums in my life. Dope Throne, Obscura, like that shit. Like this album is really fucking heavy. It's almost absurdly heavy at points. It's also like some of the other genre tags are sludge metal, doom metal, drone metal. the songs like are kind of long and they don't change a whole lot. Like it's a little bit hard to distinguish each track from the other, despite some very memorable song titles like Sex with a Stranger, Kill Yourself, or Bug Vomit. But like the vocals remind me of like Jane Doe era Converge, or like Page 99, like just like like high shrieking. And then the guitar work is and this is gonna sound like shit, but it's literally like like it is the lowest guitar that I've heard.
Like some knocked loose ass guitar tones.
Oh yeah, actually, this actually reminded me a lot of Knocked Loose. Like it's imagine, yeah, it's not quite as like hardcore punk inspired necessarily, but it's like slow, incredibly sludgy. Like just every time that a song I think has reached maximum breakdown and heaviness, it just takes it a step further. It gets lower, it gets more pulverizing, disgusting.
I just want to shout out this band's debut EP is called 9/11 Only Worse.
Is fucking August in this band?
That's the fucking Team America World Police. It'll be 9/11 times 100. That's right.
I want to read you
91,100.
This up. I want to read you some of all of these song titles are insane, just bizarre as fuck. Cement crops to a cervix bombardment.
Shit, who among us?
Reverse maggot indeed. My favorite one, like taking arthropods from. You know what? Fuck you.
Okay, I gotta listen to this one.
I'm feline worm out bumblebeast. Power violence. That's the simplest song title on this whole thing. Track 6, perforated. Yeah, that's right. I said it. I want yo runway hydraulic slut. Motor skills for basket cases. Homicide, or in other words, your granny's baking bagels.
This is some real you think
That's
you're John
nice.
fucking Lennon core.
I love the last one. Say the last one real quick.
To that one, yeah.
Okay.
Onigdivix. Bet you can't say that word, you cunt.
A quick one before the eternal worm devours Connecticut.
I mean, goated song titles. And what's fun, the best thing about this is that it looks like this is absolute dog shit, which is what I would want it to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be terrible.
Well, it says this EP is grindcore, so.
Well, it might be only 5 minutes long then, so that's great.
Yeah.
Good
And
shit.
that's all I have to say.
All right. Well, let's talk about a couple of records that not all of us have opinions on. So maybe we'll just keep it brief for the sake of having a couple of short segments. Let's start by talking about an album that Connor and I are quite passionate about, from a band that we have reviewed on the show very, very early on in the early days of the podcast, that being the New Zealand indie pop band, or power pop band. I suppose they kind of fuse elements of both. The Beths. They're the Auckland-based band that have, for a New Zealand-based indie pop band, and you have to take my word for it, there are a lot of those. There are a dime a dozen here, so many of them. But the Beths, through sheer musicianship and also through crafty ability to get signed by an international American label as well, have managed to cross over. And a lot of that was due in part to their breakout debut record, Future Me Hates Me, which is still, I think, one of the best power pop albums ever. I mean, I don't care, I'll say it. And you know, I feel bad about. I don't take back anything I said about the Beths in the last time we reviewed their second album, Jump Rope Gazers, because I think that was a slightly underwhelming follow-up, to be honest. But I hadn't even heard Future Me Hates Me when we reviewed that, so I didn't really have the full context to really appreciate what the Beths were trying to do there. I do think that record has some good songs on it, particularly on the first half, but overall, the biggest letdown of Jump Rope Gazers was that it was significantly sleepier than the record that preceded it. It didn't have the fire and the complete insanity of Future Me Hates Me's fast-paced power pop jams. Partly because the original drummer, who was such a big part of that first album, actually did leave the band before they recorded their second album. So they had a new drummer, and obviously, major lineup change. You can forgive a band for taking a while to work out the kinks there. And look, I'm not trying to denigrate Jump Rope Gazers. I know, Connor, you like that record even more than I do. It is a solid album, has some good songs on it. But when I really got to know Future Me Hates Me, I was like, well, it seems like this band, there's no way this band is ever going to recapture this energy again. I mean, because they've lost a fundamental part of the personhood that made that energy up, essentially, as well. And they also just seemed less interested in being that kind of band now. They were kind of heading in a bit of a janglier direction, kind of, I think, diluting a lot of what made them special. Boy, was I wrong. Because Expert in a Dying Field completely sidesteps where I was worried this band was heading and completely ramps up the intensity, ramps up the energy, the pace, and brings you back with another album like Future Me Hates Me, but I would say a little bit more, I guess, expansive and less kind of holistically focused on a single sound. It's a bit more diverse, but still, really, the whole point of this album is that for 11 out of the 12 songs, you're just getting, really fast-paced, intense power pop jams, essentially, with great riffs, great vocal melodies, really gorgeous, jangly guitar tones as well, and memorable vocals and lyrics from frontwoman Beth, Elizabeth Stokes, who is the titular Beth. And so yeah, this album completely blindsided me. I had high hopes for it because I had listened to the singles, which are just the first 3 songs on this album, and they were all great. And I thought, okay, cool. If they can keep this energy up for a whole album, I'm here for it, because that's exactly what I wanted from them. And I mean, lo and behold, I think they've only gone and bloody done it. I mean, at least for me, and I know for you, Connor, as well. I think that the title track, the first song on here, Expert in a Dying Field, is, I mean, one of the great indie rock songs of recent years. I mean, this song is fantastic. It has an amazing melody. It has fantastic lyrics, memorable hook. I mean, this is the thing about this record, is that if you're going to be a good power pop band, you have to bring the hooks. And Elizabeth Stokes is really good at writing memorable hooks. And the best songs on here absolutely stick themselves into your brain in a really, really powerful way through the power of your great hooks. Expert in the Dying Field, I think, is the best one of those singles, and the one that still stands out the most to me. But Knees Deep, fantastic as well. I've had that chorus stuck in my head all week. Silence is Golden, the lead single, which is completely the most intense, and again, I'm saying all of these things about, all these excessive terms about how intense and heavy it is for an indie rock album. Of course, it's not like we're talking about some metalcore shit or anything like that. It's just, I was not expecting this band to just kind of fully commit to the only bangers mentality as much as they do here. Connor, what are your thoughts on this record and how it sort of measures up to the last 2 records they've put out?
Yeah, so I've been a massive fan of these guys like ever since they put out the debut album, because I had a lot of friends who suggested it to me, and I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And just from that first track, Great No One, I was like, okay, this is totally for me. I absolutely love this. I will say I don't know if I love this new album as much as the debut, but that aside, like, this is like pretty much on par in my opinion. Like, it's still quite a bit different. It may not be quite as punchy or as blatantly like pop punk inspired, but there's a lot of amazing songwriting chops, and there's a lot of different like dynamics and different little sort of styles that they do on each of these songs. A lot of these songs don't sound like anything that they've done before. In particular, the lead single, Silence is Golden, which, holy shit, that song is just, I've been playing that song so much throughout the year. Like,
Dude, I've just been like, I bought this CD for my car the other day, and like every time I'm in the car, it's playing, and I just like I've done so much like fucking ear drumming to this song and just like completely going nuts. And I've just been like, I'm at the point where I'm just like I'm singing along to basically every song on this record. Like I just
me too.
So addictive.
So I remember when I was listening through this, I knew that I was going to like the first 3 tracks because they're the 3 singles, right? They're excellent singles. I mean, the title track is probably one of their best written songs just in general. Knees Deep is phenomenal. Then you get to like songs like Your Side, which I think is fantastic. It's a very simple, pretty easygoing song, but like
Your Side is like, it's like the best example of kind of what I think they were trying to do with Jump Rope Gazers, this sort of wistful, sort of longing song about like connection and, you know, having someone in your life and being connected to them through, you know, whatever, essentially, and doing that theme in this kind of really gorgeous, jangly, dreamy sound. And it's really the only time on the record where they do a song like that. And I'm glad it is, because again, the thing with Jump Rope Gazers is it did that kind of thing too many times to the point where it started to feel a little bit like they were writing the same song over and over. Whereas this is like, you have this perfect example of that sound. And then you have I Want to Listen, which is a little bit more of a shorter track as well. And then you go back into the energy that the first 3 songs had with Head in the Clouds and onwards.
That song is so good. That's easily one of my favorites that they've ever made.
Just the guitar, the guitar on that, like, is just so fucking good. There's just like a crunch to it that I just fucking love. And then Best Left as well. The fucking like the leads on this song are just fucking unreal. And that outro as well. You and I were basically just like jizzing together about how fucking good the outro to this song is. Like the last minute of it, fucking amazing. I just like, dude, it's stunning. So fucking good.
What I didn't expect from this record is I didn't actually expect the second half, at least for me, to be even better than the first half. Because again, you get songs like Best Left, Changing the Weather is great. When You Know, like that song could have been a hit in the 90s, I'm convinced. And we can talk about like the last 2 tracks too, because those are just incredible. I really want to shout out a particular member of the band, Jonathan Pierce, because he's in many ways, I feel like, kind of the mastermind behind the sound of the Beths.
He's like we're talking Death Cab. He's like the Chris Waller of this band.
Exactly.
Like he's, you know, guitars, production, keys. He does all this sort of stuff for the band, and he adds so much to what their whole sound is.
And there's so many like guitar flourishes, guitar leads that they add for flavor and different like production and effect techniques that they do all over this thing. And it just sounds so fantastic. Like on Your Side specifically has that one guitar break where it's like and it's so
details like
sounding.
that I hear so many records like this, and they're missing those little details that make the song feel full. You know what I mean? Like, and that was my big problem with a lot of Jump Rope Gazers as well, is they were missing the extra bits that I needed to make the songs pop. And every single song here has something like that. It's, to me, like one of the things that's kind of made me feel super attached to this is that as a New Zealander, like I've grown up fully aware of the rich and diverse heritage and tradition of jangle and power pop that comes from not only my country, but the specific city that I live in, Dunedin. Huge musical lineage here. I mean, the Dunedin sound is its own internationally recognized genre of pop music, essentially from the 80s and 90s. So like, I've always been immersed in that environment, but not often have I really connected with a lot of that music. Sometimes for sure, some bands are just indisputable, but a lot of the time I found myself at a bit of a distance from it. And so this was like, it was like seeing the light, you know, because as great as Future Me Hates Me is, it's not really like, that is much more power pop, whereas this is much more jangle pop. And I really wanted to have that connection with a New Zealand band doing that very particular New Zealand style of jangle pop. And they're just doing it here to like perfection. I mean, and it's just the only jangle pop record that has, in separate songs for me, evoked both Hop Along and Paramore. Like, it's just insane. And these are like subtle little things that I recognize as, you know, influences I'm projecting into the music, but there's little connections and things where I recognize an aspect of this music that I really, really enjoy and connect to from another artist, or from an area of music that's completely, you know, different to this, or a world or a country, you know, on the other side of the world. And it's so beautiful to see it so just transfused so beautifully here. I mean, like we were talking about that Mew album before, where it's like, you know, a perfect opener and a perfect closer. And those two are like the best songs on the record. And this is another album where I feel that way. I think Expert in a Dying Field and 2 AM are the best songs on this album. Not that they're in a stiff competition, but those are the two. I mean, Expert in a Dying Field, I think, is like, that is one of the best breakup songs I've heard in a long time. Like, and not just because it's a great hooky, fantastically catchy song, but also because it's really lyrically hard hitting as well. Like, one of the lines, my favorite line of the whole record is, "I can close the door on us, but the room still exists." And that's like that shit had me having a fucking existential crisis this week, thinking about how fucking good of a fucking metaphor that is for the end of a relationship. Like, and Liz Stokes's lyricism is like, it's that good throughout the entire record. I think every song has a flourish like that. I think she's really, really good. And again, I guess I've just had Death Cab on the brain as a week as well. Like Ben Gibbard, she's really good at like writing these like overly flowery or kind of like verbose lines, essentially, where they're a little bit more. It's not that the lyricism is particularly esoteric, just that she's kind of really fitting as much into the lines as she can. And she's really, really good at writing in that way. And, you know, and she'll juxtapose that with really, really simple hooks or moments where she's just repeating something really, like a really, really straightforward line that just gives you that thing to hook onto or hang on to in between, you know, the denseness of her verses. Like, the only thing left for me to do would just be to read the lyrics to you, and that's kind of not all that interesting, so I'm not going to do that. But like a song like 2 AM, I mean, just that to me is like, it's the meeting point of, like, it reminded me a little bit of like Julian Baker's Something off of a Sprained Ankle, mixed with like, fuck, I don't even know. It's just a really unusual and bold song for them, and it ends the record in a really, you know, intense place musically, and also really powerful place emotionally too. Like, I feel that this is a record about a certain set of emotions that Beth has experienced in a certain period of her life. And I think she's really crafted something special. Okay. Rina Sawayama has also put an album out last week as well. Hold the Girl, the, I won't say long awaited, but somewhat awaited follow-up to her 2020 album, Sawayama Breakthrough debut release. A big album in the alternative pop sphere. Rina was very quickly inundated with stands of her own, and she very much kind of carved out a niche that she belonged in. The Sawayama album, I think, is a really good album. I think it is a textbook example of great singles, an album I don't really like a whole lot as a holistically full thing, but I get the vision, and I'm super happy that she had the level of success that she did with it. I mean, she deserved more, obviously. Yeah, but songs like XS, Shut the Fuck Up, you know, great singles on that record. A few deep cuts that I really like as well. Songs like Bad Friend and is that one song I really like, Tokyo Love Hotel. That was a good song. So some good songs on that record. I really enjoyed that album. And here we are with the follow-up, Hold the Girl, which sees Rina, I think, simultaneously trying to achieve the level of crossover success that she didn't quite manage with her debut, and it came close. And also to kind of try and satisfy the fans of hers who've come on board because of her particular, you know, like idiosyncratic style of pop music, you know, filtering the sort of Asian American experience through hyper pop adjacent, you know, banger stuff. Like, she's just a melting pot of sounds and influences and all these sorts of things that she's trying to bring together. And it makes for an artist who is, for me at least, equal parts fascinating and slightly infuriating, because it's almost as though the more she tries to assimilate into her musical sphere, the less of a clear artistic identity she seems to have to me. And it's just a thing I think that it could fully be a me thing, but I think generally a few people seem to be a bit more underwhelmed with this. So maybe there's some, commonality to that experience a little bit. But I do think that Rina, rather than honing the things that she did the best on her debut, has kind of continued to sprawl outward in a way that record did, but this record does, I think, to a greater extreme. And it makes it an interesting album to listen to for sure. I listened to it twice this week, and both times, I wasn't feeling it for the most part, but I was happy to listen to it. And I found the direction she was going in fascinating, and I kind of wished that they had been better executed. But it does feel, to me at least, like Rina is continuing to sort of expand her reach rather than hone her sound. I'm curious, Jake and Connor, what you guys think of that assessment.
That's the thing about this album, is that there's not a lot to elaborate on here, in that I like the original, like Rina's first album, a whole lot, probably a lot more than Riley. That was one of those records that felt really vital in 2020 sort of quarantine. It was like a quintessential fun escapist album where it blended some really sharp pop sensibilities with these really deeply uncool 2000s rock pastiches that I loved immensely. There are songs on that album, on Excess, there's down-tuned guitar riffs that sound like nu metal songs. It's and there something like Dynasty is it feels like the inversion of it feels like if an Evanescence song was also a Pride Parade. There's so many songs on that album that is for sure front loaded, but I think the back half of the record is a bit more introspective and interesting, even if it's not something I return to a whole lot. And my hope for Rina is that, she would take what she's done so far and then kind of, and I guess this was wrong of me to expect, but kind of play up the sort of uncool sensibilities that she made cool on that album, because she's so confident and such an interesting artist. And that's the most broadly overriding thing I'll say for Hold the Girl, is that it feels like a confident record from a performance standpoint. Rina is always at, she's always present, she's always here, she's always got even when some of the hooks don't work, she still gives it her all. So that's what makes this album, that is very middling for me, still feel like it carries itself without being a boring slog, which is kind of impressive, because the first half of this album is
I would describe it as dire.
It's a tumbleweed fest. There are moments on here that I think are okay. I think the opener, Minor Feelings, is all right. It's just too short and doesn't really have enough musical ideas to really sustain itself. But lyrically, it's an introduction to the album. And then there's the title track, which basically this first half, all these songs suffer from the same problem, is that the production here is so slick that it just evades me. It's so big, it's so polished. There's no edge or grit, and I'm not saying that pop music has to, but Rina's personality loses something when it's inside these almost all-encompassing sounding instrumentals that just focus on being big stadium rock pop kind of things, Catch Me in the Air, Forgiveness, Holy Till You Let Me Go. All of these songs rely on hooks that are just Rina dragging out a syllable, and it gets really repetitive really quickly on this first half, which makes the second half kind of beguiling, because again, it's what I mentioned earlier in the What We've Been Listening To segment, is that there's a great EP in this overly long album. I think that it picks up with Your Age is not a great song, but I still feel it has a more centralized identity. And once you hit Frankenstein, which is one of the better pop songs she's put out so far, this actually maintains some momentum. Hurricanes right after that, I think, is actually even better. And even though I'm not in love with Send My Love to John as a musical experience, I think lyrically it really comes together. And then Phantom and To Be Alive are they're capitalizing off of these emotions that Rina has that have just been like largely either gone or way too thin on the first part of the record. Like, I think especially Phantom here is like my favorite song. It combines like all of the emotionality and Rina's knack for sharp, like just absolutely pummeling hooks, and like it works. It's just that, man, this shit is really lopsided.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I basically co-sign all of that. Hurricanes and To Be Alive, I think, are by far the runaway best songs for me. Hurricanes is, I think, a great, like, and they're great for very similar reasons, which is that they're incredibly excessive, you know, pun not intended. They are like, they're just really ridiculously over the top songs that are sort of melodramatic emotionally and just kind of like all, you know, power chords, and they've kind of like got a little bit of
That's
that
what you
sort
want.
of, yeah, they've got a little bit of that sort of like, you know, stadium sort of like Queen-esque energy, and how kind of ridiculous they are, and the 80s-ness of it all a bit. And they work really well. Like To Be Alive, especially as an ending to the record, is quite satisfying. But it's, like you said, it's kind of unearned also in a way like that. I mean, I think the best song in the first half, best, is probably the title track for me, just because I think that's the most like the most well-formed pop song, even though it's frustratingly middling. It's like it kind of ticks the boxes a little bit. But This Hell, which you did maybe pointedly or maybe just for no reason at all,
I think I think This Hell is fine. Like, it's just, it's fine.
This Hell is, it's not terrible. It certainly, again, like Hold the Girl, it kind of adheres to a lot of the boilerplate things that a pop song has to do, more or less. Like, structurally, it's sound. But I mean, this song is unbearably cloying, like lyrically and just sentimentally. It is ridiculous. I mean, look, I get this. Like, let it never be said that we on the Jamsity podcast aim to take anything away from queer artists celebrating their sexuality. I mean, we are, for the most part. Connor, you're excluded from this, but we are gay as fuck. And we fully just
a world where gay and straight reversed is the norm.
So like we completely, you know, we're in the bag for this type of shit, and we love to see it. And Rina is proudly pansexual, I believe, and she has talked a lot about her sexuality, and a lot of her music, even on that first album, is about celebrating that and the community of, you know, queer fans and friends and family and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't make This Hell any more listenable. I mean, it's the most like, it's like Hallmark did a gay pride song. It's it's like Disney. It's like, when I listen to it, it's like
Love
Disney
Simon moment.
Yeah, it fucking, yeah, exactly. It's just, we deserve. I'm gonna say we deserve better. I'm just gonna say it.
It's one of the moments where, like, musically, I think it's fine, but there are a lot of sentiments on here that feel like they just run really, really thinly, and it's just kind of, it's just very strange, just because you can tell that Rina means every word, but it also quasi paradoxically feels like she's making every possible choice to make these sentiments delivered in like the most unbearably cloying way possible.
It's like a song that's like so desperately trying to appeal to a very specific, like, it's like a song that's trying to appeal to a straight person's vision of what gay people are like.
It's a bit gentrified. Yeah.
Like, and I know that, again, I'm not trying to say Rina's not authentically queer or anything. This is just how the song comes across. I mean,
the
these
song
lyrics,
equivalent of this year's movie They Them.
I mean, these lyrics are like,
Ooh.
you know, the chorus.
It can't be that bad.
It's not that bad. The chorus is like, "Ooh, because the devil's wearing Prada and loves a little drama." And like, it's Flame Red, caught the moment, posing for the paparazzi. Fuck what they did to Britney, to Lady Di and Whitney. Don't know why we're here, but might as well get down and dirty. That Satan's looking thirsty.
Bringing up Princess Diana and Britney Spears in your analogy here struck me as very, very kind of distasteful, frankly. Because, you know, these are people who live particularly tragic existences, and I don't really feel like this is enough to connect you with them. This is to Lady Gaga what the last Poppy album was to Grimes. Like,
feel
I need
similarly.
Rina to like pivot and be like, not that I want to pigeonhole her for being this kind of artist, but I sort of thought that with her like Metallica cover of Enter Sandman, the direction she'd be going is like stadium pop 9-inch nails. And I think she can do that. She shows signs of being able to do that. Can you do that, please?
I think
would be
hopefully,
cool.
I imagine the response to this will maybe help Rina to illuminate exactly what it is that her fans want from her. Not that she's making music exclusively for other people, but I think that feedback is going to be is important for any artist, I think, and it's your choice as an artist, your ability to choose to what extent you take that feedback on board versus ignore it, depending on what your vision is. And I know that this album is well worth acknowledging. You know, it's been a shit 2 years for Rina, and she said in the press notes for this album's come out of basically the worst period of her life, essentially, where she's gone through a lot of tough shit, essentially, and that is channeled into a lot of the energy, the bitterness, but also the kind of willful fuck it all sort of, you know, desire to just express yourself. And part of the excess and ridiculousness of this album, I think, is channeling that, and I respect it. It's just not there for me.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me a little bit of Crash by Charlie.
I had the same thought last night.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's I don't mind Crash. I think that album that one felt more like a diversion into more conventional stuff, and you know, a lot of people are speculating that Charlie will go back into her more experimental sound.
I mean,
whereas
I think
Rina,
I think Charlie just wears that a bit better than Rina. I mean, I don't. You might disagree, but I think that Crash is a measurably more successful record than this is.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
I like this more, but only because Crash didn't have any of the high points that this did. It's just kind of a similar feeling of being a mixed bag. Both artists are trying to make like a darker album, and they just don't commit to that darkness like at all.
I also just want to say, complete aside, all the little Twitter stands have been like, oh, the cover is a homage to Björk's Volta cover. And I'm like, yeah, but also she's obviously fucking dressed as Irma Vep, right? None of you are, you're not cultured enough to see that.
Also, I don't care if it's an homage to Björk's worst album cover. Fucking who cares?
It's like, it's just, yeah, it's not even like that's even a reach, to be honest. Like, she's obviously evoking Irma Vep, specifically Maggie Cheung, her portrayal of Irma Vep.
Come on.
And again, another Asian actress who kind of crossed over into a Western audience as well. Like, it's obvious evocation. Anyway, that's just a little bit whatever.
The thing about me with Rina, her music, I was always a huge fan of the Rina EP. It's
I still think that's her best thing as well that she's put out. I like that EP.
As a whole, absolutely, yeah. And I've grown to like Sawayama quite a bit. When I first heard it, I actually had very mixed feelings because there were a lot of tracks that I really loved, like excuse me, like Excess, for example, or
Great song.
Tokyo Love Hotel, Love Me for Me, Akasaka Sad. Like I love a lot of those songs. Even the cuts that I didn't like as much, it's really started to grow on me the more I listened to it. But with this album, I do think it's just okay. And I feel, but I don't have that feeling that it's going to grow on me, because in comparison, the reason why I brought up Crash is because this does feel like it doesn't feel quite as individual or as recognizable as her previous music has. It doesn't quite have that flair, that fire that I think she had on her last album. And there are like a lot of moments where she does get a little ambitious with the styles and stuff, and it just doesn't really work for me a lot of the times. There are some songs here where again, it's more like 2000s like pop kind of worship, and it just doesn't work for me. Like This Hell, y'all did a great job talking about that. It just, to me, that song just reminds me of Lady Gaga and nothing much more.
Yeah.
I can't stand that guitar lead in that song. I find it so annoying. Like I don't know. It's just there's something about it that really grates me.
It's really lame. Like lame is the word I thought of while I see this. Like
for me, it's not even with this album. It's not even like a first half versus second half. For me, it's just like this track is pretty good. I like the title track. I think it's pretty good. Your Age, honestly, is one of my least favorite Rina songs ever. I thought this track was just did not work for me at all. It almost feels the most 9 Inch Nails, but almost like a cheap like pastiche of it.
The lyrics are terrible. I'll just say that they're fucking bad, and it hurts to say that because I can read them and see she's obviously like communicating some real fucking, some real shit she went through. Like she describes like having gone through a social suicide, and I can tell that she probably like had a really tough time, maybe hit some fake friends or whatever, had to go through some ugly shit. But I'm sorry, this is juvenile. I'm sorry, Rina, but it is.
Mm-hmm. I do like some songs like Frankenstein. I also liked Imagining. I thought that was kind of a cool track. It kind of, but again, it just kind of reminded me of some stuff that I heard. Like that track in particular reminded me of Kill V Mame by Grimes.
One of the best Grimes songs.
Exactly. So that's probably one of the reasons I like that track. Hurricanes, I understand why it's one of your guys' more favorite tracks. But anytime I hear the song, I feel like I'm just listening to a Kelly Clarkson song. Like that chorus just is a dead ringer for Kelly Clarkson to me.
Yeah, and that's probably, I think, the intention again, going back to how much Sawayama aped like Britney and all that sort of stuff. I actually think that there's something kind of endearing about like making a record that apes Britney and following it up by making a record that apes Kelly Clarkson. Just completely going down from A-list to B-list to C-list version of the same thing. I'm going to call it now.
Yeah.
First record aping Britney, this record aping Kelly. LP3 is going to be all Avril Lavigne pastiche the entire time.
Rina
cool.
could do it though. I think she could pull that off. I was just going to say before we wrap it up is that I feel like an album that kind of similarly tried to do something like this, and to it's like an artist that had a little bit more of a niche that's vying more for a credible mainstream thing, even though the album's content is darker, but the sound is like brighter. And the person that pulled this off last year was Japanese Breakfast's album, which I feel like does a lot of really similar things, but did that with a lot basically she pulled the ethos of the Dillinger Escape Plan, where making her music more accessible made it more unique instead of less unique. Whereas I think Rina on this album kind of does the opposite.
Let's move into the first of our proper reviews of the day, with all four of us contributing. This being, of course, Death Cab for Cutie, Asphalt Meadows. Now, Death Cab, I feel like we've already basically talked so much about Death Cab in this episode. I'll give a little bit of necessary context. This is the 10th Death Cab for Cutie album. It is the third album since the departure of founding member and pivotal figure in the sound of Death Cab, Chris Waller, who left after the release of 2011's, I'm going to say it, slightly underrated Codes and Keys, a record that I revisited this week, and though it is a considerable step down from the records that precedes it, I still think that record is kind of good and kind of just deserves a little bit more of a reevaluation. But anyway, since then, with the records Kintsugi and Thank You for Today, Death Cab have kind of dulled their sound a little bit down. I mean, it's Chris Waller, it can't be understated how much he contributed to that record. I mean, case in point, he went on to produce Near Oh My God by Foxing. So that's what he added to Death Cab for Cutie. But Kintsugi and Thank You for Today were more stripped back records. I'll just say they were bad. Bad albums. I don't care for them. Particularly Kintsugi, which just really rubbed me the wrong way when it came out in 2015 and still hasn't really grown on me at all, unfortunately. Yeah, Morgan's summing it up right there. Just a complete non-starter. And then Thank You for Today was a little bit better, but I remember it less, despite it being 3 years more recent than Kintsugi. Like, I can remember songs like Kintsugi, but not Thank You for Today.
I got Kintsugi on vinyl for Christmas one year. Because
That's awkward.
Because well, I hadn't heard the album yet, so I was pretty excited still. But yeah, my dad got it because I had asked for Transatlanticism as well. He's like, "Oh, new Death Cab album, so I'll get him this one." And I listened to that record probably 5 times, just trying
to like it. Yeah.
That's asking your parents for a Death Cab vinyl for like your birthday or Christmas. I hope that it came with like 6 months free of therapy.
Now, look, I want to we're getting off to a bit of a rocky start here. On the off chance that any members of Death Cab for Cutie or just fans are watching, the new record's really great, and we're all really big fans of it. And the reason why I established that preamble about the last 2 records not being very good, in my estimation, is that Asphalt Meadows is an astonishing return to form, considering the quality of those last 2 records, in my estimation. I mean, not only is this better than those, it's better than Codes and Keys. It's almost as good as Narrow Stairs, in my opinion. And I could see some people even preferring it to that record. I mean, this is an absolute adrenaline shot compared to some of their more recent stuff. And I'm not even going to do the cop-out music critic thing and attribute that to the fact that the band teamed up with John Congleton to produce this. Obviously, his production style, he's really great at getting a bit more noise and heft out of a band. I mean, obviously, that's what he did for everything with Reanimator in 2020, and he's worked with a number of great indie rock bands as well. But I just think that Death Cab sound more energized about writing songs here. Ben Gibbard sounds like he has a bit more passion about writing and making music than he has in a while. And just the output of that and the general quality is just reflects that so much more. There's more experimentation that I think is more successful than what the band have done in the past, particularly with songs like the lead single, Foxglove Through the Clear Cut. But also you just have great deep cuts on this record as well, a genuinely warm and inviting aesthetic that really rewards re-listens as well. Songs that would fit in on a number of their classic era records as well. There's so much to really dig into and appreciate about Asphalt Meadows. It's not a masterpiece. I do think that the second half isn't quite as good as the first half, but I mean, I've listened to this record an awful lot this week, willfully, because I enjoy the fuck out of it. I think it's a really, really great record for this band at this stage in their career. And I'd love to hear what you guys think.
But this is probably the first time, maybe ever, that, because I got into Death Cab, like probably around high school. And they weren't the most active when I was in high school. But this is probably the first time I've been truly actually excited for a new Death Cab album, just because, I remember actually kind of liking the singles for Kintsugi, in particular the opening track. But I don't remember the rest of that record at all. And I barely remember those singles even then. And I think I just completely ignored Thank You for Today, even though I do want to eventually check it out, just see what it's like. So I haven't been that interested in the late career Death Cab, besides being such a huge fan of their classic material. But this one caught my interest, primarily because I heard the first single, which was Roman Candles. And that as the first single for this album was like mind-blowing. Like, it's not necessarily my favorite song here, but that doesn't sound like anything they have ever released prior. It was noisy, it was at times even kind of dissonant, it was just blaringly loud. It's basically like a noise pop song, and I was really into it. And I really liked the other singles when they came out, in particular Here to Forever, even though it didn't feel like the same. It didn't feel like it was in the same direction as Roman Candles. I just thought it was a really well-written tune. It reminds me of actually a little bit of Foals in there at points. But then I heard Foxglove Through the Clear Cut, and I was like, holy shit, this is one of the band's best songs maybe ever. I absolutely love that song. So when I listened to this whole thing this past week, I will say I don't think everything here works for me on a cohesive level, but I agree that this is quite easily their best album since at least Narrow Stairs. I think there's ever since Chris Walla left, there's kind of been this hole in the band, at least in terms of their like creativity and songwriting and intricacy. But with this direction, there's a bit of a revitalization in this band, and I really think that a great step in the right direction for whatever they might do after this if they release more music. So
Jake, what do you think is the somewhat of a new boy compared to the other three of us to Death Cab?
Well, maybe it's just because I've only heard the 2 albums, and I mean, I've made reference to the fact that Death Cab for Cutie, I feel like their sort of genre leanings don't quite get at everything that they do, but like listening to this was somewhat jarring just because it sounds very, very different. Like hell, even Ben Gibbard's voice sounds very, very different. And I think that that's to this album's benefit, as I think it all adds to a sort of like, not to say that it's channeling the same vibe or even writing style, but a lot of what I was thinking of this week when listening to this was the Menzingers. And it was because this feels like an album that's from somebody who is older and is reckoning with the fact that he's older. I think a lot of the content on here kind of dwells on that, as well as, you know, it's like how a lot of the content on transatlanticism deals with being a sort of late teenager. And thus, this feels like it comes from a place of like genuine, sincere, like emotionality, but also a sort of complexity that feels like it hasn't really been in their music that I've listened to, at least thus far. And it ends up being such a consistently rewarding listen to me. I definitely agree to some extent that the back half is less consistent than the front half. That said, the back half still has like my favorite moments on here. Like I think that like Wheat Life Waves is a good song. It's probably my least favorite thing here. And I do think that I'll Never Give Up on You is a slightly less sort of a holistic ending to this album that I would have liked a little bit more from. But everything else here, I fucking love. You have sort of traditional kind of Death Cab moments like Fragments from the Decade, which is maybe my favorite song on here, which is just like, it's so plain and pretty, but it's also one of the most sincere songs on here. And same goes for Foxglove Through the Clear Cut, which I think is just an absolute fucking, like, there's so many songs on here that unexpectedly just kind of bang for Death Cab for Cutie. Like, I mean, I Don't Know How I Survive and Roman Candles and stuff, like they're like stabs of really harsh, sharp guitar on these songs that sound like they're sort of like waves of noise that are like kind of crusted over these instrumentals. And it feels like really abrasive, but in a way that complements all of the music and all of the material. And it's a sound that makes this band that's now full of, you know, emo elder statesmen feel young and youthful, but also adds a sort of weathered quality to, like, it feels like it really matches the title and the aesthetic of the album cover, the sort of idea of Asphalt Meadows, just the sort of notion of like getting older and seeing the world for what it is and having to reckon with that fact. It has so many great little moments of emotion on here. And I just, every time I listened to this, I liked it even more, to the point where, yeah, it's not as good as Transatlanticism or Plans from what I've heard, but it also, like, it's not exactly that many feet away from it, if you catch my drift.
And that's the thing, like when you have records like that, you don't need to make another record that's as good as those to make a great album. And that's the thing, is that this is a great record, and it is not even just a great record for Death Cab. It is a great record.
No, it's just plainly great.
It's fantastic. And you mentioned I Don't Know How I Survive. I mean, that is my favorite song on here. I mean,
so good.
When I heard this, it was like, I started imagining like what a Death Cab album produced by BJ Burton would sound like. And for the kids at home, he's the guy who produced the last two Low albums, worked with Charlie XCX, produced 22 A Million by Bon Iver, like known for helping artists like really capture a wild and sonically bizarre sound where you have kind of ramp up all of the, distortion and extremities in your music. But now I'm just like, I don't even know if I really need that, because this is so satisfying as it is. Like the dynamics in this song, like this, the quiet to loud, how rhythmically impactful that kind of just plucked sort of jangly sort of acoustic guitar sound is. And then when the full band come in, and Ben's just sounds great. He's fantastic. Like we're in these heavier moments as well. It can't be understated how great Ben is at fitting whether the band are doing that kind of more slower, gentler sound, like on some of that second last song, Favorites from the Decade, or whether they're going full in, like on the first two songs. And then you have a classic Death Cab song in my IMO in fourth track, Rand McNally, which like immediately emotionally, that takes me back to like the kind of melodramatic place of albums like Plans, because this song is this song fucking hurts, man. This song is sad as fuck. And it's like sad as fuck in a way that I feel like I always associate with Ben Gibbard, but that he hasn't, in my opinion, been able to sell in a really long time. The storytelling in this song as well, the imagery is great. A Rand McNally Atlas, cheap coffee stains. Now I wouldn't know how to use one with my life at stake. You were waiting on a payphone at a truck stop in Houston, trying to call your mother because she's a warrior. Handful of 20s in your overcoat, always rolled into a pillow on some stranger's floor. And you tell these stories with happy endings only when interrupted before they're over. Like, and then the won't let the light fade. It's like very like, maudlin kind of indie stuff, but it's just, he's so good at it. And it's just like the whole thing has this almost like not Americana, but sort of like desolate southern sort of like
heartland, almost.
Heartland, that's the word I was looking for, just sort of a tinge to it. And the imagery as well, there's a lot of like American road imagery and stuff. Like the one verse is set in Texas and one verse is set in Wyoming, so it's like it's all over the place. And it's restless and it's lonely, and it's just it's gorgeous. And when you have it sandwiched between like songs that are as impactful as the title track, and then the song I've listened to the most, Here to Forever, which is just like another one of those like really hooky, really great Death Cab songs that I just cannot get enough of. Like the first 6 songs on this record, I think, impeccable series of songs. And I do think that, there are some weaker moments, but even songs like Wet Like Waves get a pass from me, if only because I get to hear Ben Gibbard referencing Prefab Sprout of all bands.
I thought of you the instant he said that. I was just like,
And so Ben really hasn't lost a step in that type of like weird references and verbose lyricism that he does. Like, I just want an anecdote that I have about listening to this for the first time. When I first heard Here to Forever, like the opening lines of the song, in every movie I watch from the 50s, there's only one thought that swirls around my head now. That's that everyone there on the screen, they're all dead now. You couldn't write a more Ben Gibbard lyric if you tried. That is the most Ben Gibbard has ever been Gibbarded. That like, and I'll tell you the anecdote I have for why that is the case is that the first time I heard this song, and he said Ben Gibbard did. First time I heard the song, and he said, in every movie I watch from the 50s, there's only one thought that swirls. I immediately knew he was going to end up talking about how the actors are all dead. The first time I heard this, I immediately knew that's where he was going, because I know Ben Gibbard. And it's just like
Gen Bibbard.
Gendy Tartakovsky.
I'm gonna make.
It's real like the glove compartment is inaccurately named core lyricism.
I'm gonna name the next annoying indie band that everybody forgets about in 2 weeks. Gen Bibbard.
Tom Cruise.
Mitt Romney. No, sorry, that's not
Cowboy.
That's the wrong way of saying it.
That's just the fucker's name.
My favorite pop punk band, Mitt Romney.
Ritt
Mon
Romney.
To be fair, That is not a fucking name either. Mitt.
No.
I want to see. I want to see. Rit Momney open for the Callous Cowboys.
Yeah, but I'll just come when the Callous Cowboys start playing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When they throw out the first pitch. Anyway, Morgan, what you're the most death cab that ever death cabbed. What do you think of this album?
Did you just call me a faggot?
Yes.
I ain't saying you were straighter.
Did you just fucking? Well, I ain't calling you a truther.
I tried to make that work.
Just
Well, I ain't saying that she a gold digger.
But he ain't messing with
no broke fellas.
Who wasn't she messing with, Morgan?
I can neither confirm nor
Who was
deny
on the moon, Saoirse?
at this moment.
And where were the fellas in question?
Well, I can say Paris. Transatlanticism and plans shaped me as a person in my youth, and I still go back to both of them frequently because I enjoy pain. And you know, I didn't even listen to Thank You for Today, mostly because it had that gay ass album name.
Ben Gibbard, the kind of dude to say thank you for today when he's getting broken up with. I just want to say thank you for this, for everything. Anyway, that's the cruelest possible thing I could say to anyone. I'm sorry. I mean,
we are bullying this man.
It hurts to say, but I had more or less written this band off at this point. And I heard Roman Candles, the first single. And to be honest, I'm still not crazy about that song. That's probably my least favorite thing here. But, you know, I kind of have a noise pop allergy. We've discussed this. But I thought it was a bold new direction when that is what this band needed specifically, I think. Mm-hmm. So that was welcome. And I don't know if it was the second single, but the next single that I heard was Foxglove Through the Clear Cut, because I think it was either Stephen Hayden or Ian Cohen was like, this is the tits. So I was like,
it's definitely Ian. Stephen famously does not like Death Cab.
Well, fuck.
What a weird man.
Anyway, I was like, I'll be the judge of that, Mr. Cohen. It's one of the best songs this band has ever done.
Yeah.
And it's that still is my favorite thing on here. But there are significant contenders because this album, I think, doesn't really have a miss. It's a little all over the shop, which I think is a good and bad thing in this case. It feels like they are exploring new ground for them while also making things that make you remember why you love this band in the first place.
This is certainly this year's pressure machine, I think,
I was
respect of like
before.
A veteran band after a couple really notable misfires coming back with something that is both reliably solid and reminds you why you originally liked them and also kind of uncharted territory for them. Yeah. So
I mean, when I was describing Rand McNally before, I think what I was trying to do is say it sounds like a pressure machine deep cut, basically, that song. But yeah, the band took a risk naming an album something that begins with us. Like, you know, when you do that, you're
more like Asphalt Meadows.
You got to bring it, essentially. Otherwise, you know, the clownery is right there. And they did it. They brought it. It's a great record. So, you know, Ben Gibbard said, your move. And I said,
checkmate.
I said, yes.
And I told him to go refill my Wellbutrin prescription.
That reminds me, I need to.
All right then.
I'm not fucking kidding.
I know you're not.
Like,
All right. Favorite tracks and ratings for Asphalt Meadows. Jake, why don't you go first?
Very, very expectedly, my favorite song here is Foxglove Through the Clear Cut. Second favorite is probably Fragments from the Decade. And I'll probably say I Miss Strangers. That's got a really great hook. I really love that song. Yeah, this is I'm gonna give this I've been saying an 8 all week, but I'm feeling a strong 8.5 out of 10 on this one. I don't really have a least favorite song here.
Morgan.
Yeah, Foxglove. Fucking yeah, that's like one of the 5 best songs of this year for me. But I will also shout out I Don't Know How I Survive and the title track. Least favorite, probably Roman Candles, but I do like that song pretty well. And I'll give this an 8.5 out of 10.
All right, my 3 favorite songs are I Don't Know How I Survive, Rand McNally, and Here to Forever. Least favorite is probably Wheat Like Waves, and I give the album a 7.5.
My 3 favorites are, of course, Foxglove Through the Clear Cut. I Don't Know How I Survive, and probably it's either Roman Candles or I Miss Strangers. Maybe Roman Candles. My least favorite is probably I'll Never Give Up on You. And I'm going to give this a 7.5.
All right, which gives us an average overall of 8.0 for Death Cab for Cuties, Asphalt Meadows. All right, let's get into our final review of the day, which is, of course, the new album from the Mars Volta. The Mars Volta. Here we are. They're
Mars Volta.
After 10 years since their last album, Nocturnicate, and perhaps more importantly,
1 decade,
indeed,
1/10 of a century,
indeed,
1% of a millennium, even.
all of these things are true. And more importantly, 2 years since we reviewed the entire Mars Volta discography on this channel. One of the very first videos that we did, all 4 of us were present. It was an experience. What's still one of my favorite things we put out in those early days. So it's fitting that as the Mars Volta should come together again, as should the 4 of us, to talk about and debate the merits of their latest effort, which is a self-titled record, a daring move for any band to do coming back from a hiatus.
Yes, a statement of purpose is definitely what a self-titled album marks. And I guess one thing I wanted to get into is this album has been heralded as a bold redefinition of the Mars Volta's sound. And I would say that's only part of the picture, because I see their new self-titled record as more of a recontextualization of the sound, of their sound. They have all of the core elements from about their discography. Like when I listened to this, I was especially thinking of the synthesizer work and production of a record like Nocturnicate, the smooth, calm, but plaintive and somber jams of a record like Octahedron, and the Latin fusion of a record like Francis the Mute. So while these sounds do have precedent within Volta's greater discography, Riley, you do make a good observation that this is fundamentally something different for the band. And I guess that's what we're discussing today. What's new? What stayed the same?
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it raises a whole bunch of interesting questions that we can kind of engage with in terms of the relationship between bands and their fans, essentially, like between the relationship that you tend to have with a band when you connect with them over a particular style and aesthetic that they pursue, and how you as a listener negotiate with a dramatic shift from that. Or, you can argue about the semantics of how dramatic it is. You argue with a dramatic recontextualization of that, for instance. Like, how do you feel about that, and what is your relationship with that? Because at the very least, it's something that is going to demand, or is going to naturally attract, more of your focus and curiosity than most other musicians doing this style of music would. So it puts you automatically in a more discerning mood, I think, or at least to approach the music from a more discerning framework. And I think the way that it integrates and kind of draws together all these different disparate elements from, as you say, the entire career essentially of this band from the early 2000s up until 2012 is really fascinating. And it also brings to mind like what a good, or what even a successful reunion album should be, essentially. And I think there's a lot of interesting questions that this record poses, and not necessarily even answers, but just gets you to think about, all the while you're interrogating and letting yourself kind of get lost within the contours of these numerous, mostly fairly short, but also kind of fragmented in the certain sense that they kind of just weave and bend into each other, these interesting little songs.
That's actually an aspect I really wanted to address right away, Riley, how these songs tie together, because I have seen a lot of complaints online about this record. And let's be real, a lot of fans of the Mars Volta have dismissed this record right out of the gate. That is apparent in the scores on aggregate sites like Rate Your Music, where this is sitting at like a
2.77.
Oh, I saw it 6 last, but I guess it's gone up just the hair. But
hey, it's they're coming around.
Positive trends, I suppose. But this is all, and you can look on the Mars Volta subreddit and see a number of divisive threads arguing this record's merits. And what I find fascinating right out of the gate is I think this album holds up right off the bat. One of the Mars Volta's best traditions as a band is that they are an albums band. They have always been, and I think this, as this record shows, always will be. And one thing I can understand about this record are people like when we got the batch of singles leading into this record, Black Light Shine, I believe it was really just the first 3 or 4 tracks. Yes.
I remember Vigil
it was
being
Black
one.
Light Shine, it was Graveyard Love, and it was Vigil.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's the opening run of songs on here, but point being,
it's the first 2 and the 5th.
And me not knowing the track order serves my own point that I really think as a record, their new self-titled project is meant to be viewed as a solitary, cohesive whole rather than fragmented songs, because of the way they flow together, the way these songs are paced, the way the tension rises and collapses throughout the 45-minute runtime. And I guess the conclusion I ultimately came to is that this is ostensibly kind of a 45-minute song going through non-repetitive passages, not entirely dissimilar from something like Cassandra Gemini, although admittedly presented in a very different way with a very different palette of sounds. And that's just the way I view this record. Of course, I'd like to hear from Jake Morgan. How have you guys been taking to the Mars Volta? The Mars Volta.
We're just going to parenthetical every single time we say the Mars Volta, the Mars Volta.
Absolutely.
Honestly, this was more or less like, I believe at least a couple of you can confirm it, is that when the singles were being released, I more or less predicted this was going to be the case, in that I thought that this was going to add to sort of one holistic kind of suite, just because as the songs came out, my trepidation was, I was just like, I like these as individual songs, but I also just feel like there is something missing here. And you don't really get the full picture of that until you do listen to the entire album. And I think that the Mars Volta self-titling this, I think, is like, we often see that as a play that many bands pull when they are either out of ideas or they just, they need to rush out a bunch of songs and they're just going to call an album something. And I feel like this is sort of being misattributed with that decision, because in the lead up to this, there were some interviews that were released from Cedric and Omar, and they did directly address the idea of fan expectations and this record and how it fits into their overall context. And they were sort of like questioned with like, what about, the idea of like fan backlash against the sort of them abandoning their more traditional progressive rock roots. And they were just kind of like, very Cedric and Omar response. They were both just kind of like, we don't really give a shit. And they were more or less just like, we're going to make the music that we're going to make, because if we bow to the whims and expectations of our fans, that is directly antithetical to who we are as artists. They're like, that idea is corporate. That idea is like government. That's control. That's the antithesis of the Mars Volta, which is about freedom and expression. And as like that was sort of a primer for the record, that sort of prepared me for what they were going to end up doing here. And more or less, this is them exploring facets of their sounds that have always been there, but have kind of been at the periphery, specifically the sort of Latin psychedelic pop sort of stuff. I mean, you can certainly hear that in the sort of Latin tinged percussion on something like Francis the Mute, and I think that's immediately demonstrated by Black Light Shine on here. But in terms of like how this is being seen and received, it's very funny to me that Black Light Shine is the highest rated track on here, and then like nothing else comes remotely close to that particular rating, because Black Light Shine does feel like one of the more fully formed songs on here. It feels like the movement it goes through, while it's not traditionally like a chorus verse kind of thing, it still feels like a complete movement. So I think that when these singles came out and people listened to them, they were more or less expecting something different, but maybe didn't expect what specifically. Like, I know that Black Light Shine was a well-received song. Graveyard Love, yes, but a little less so. And then people just fucking hated Vigil. They were like, this is awful. And I was just sitting there like, okay, like I just was sort of like kind of mystified, because I was like, I don't even necessarily think that this is the best three of these songs, but like, it's fine. And not even that, I think it's good. I think that everything on here is good, honestly. And I feel like that is going to be taken the wrong way from some people who are just like, oh, you are all Mars Volta fanboys. And like, okay, sure, fine, whatever. The Mars Volta is one of all of our favorite bands. It's my second favorite band, August's favorite band. But the thing here is that I'm in a precarious position with this album where I simultaneously respect and enjoy the direction this album takes in, but also feel as though it's not really a wholly realized version of itself. There are a lot of moments here where I think as an album experience, it does hold up, but there are still singular parts of it that feel quizzically brief. There are points on the album like Que Dios te maldiga mi corazón, which is, 1 minute and 41 seconds. And again, this is one of the higher rated tracks on here. And this song is great. And then it's over. And then it just sort of segues into an idea. And that segue is fine. But it's also like, I wanted more from that. I feel like you could have gotten more out of this idea without necessarily going into a more traditionally proggy structure. These feel like sort of clippets and samples from things I feel like the band maybe could have developed a little bit more. This is the Mars Volta's shortest album. It's 44 minutes long. And in one respect, it makes the sort of digestible format of the record feel a little bit more, it suits the purpose well. But at the same time, I would be lying if I said I didn't feel like maybe adding like a total 10 minutes onto this album's track list in total to sort of flesh some of these ideas out without necessarily making it proggier, because I want to emphasize that I didn't want a prog album from the Mars Volta, a new prog album. They've done that. They've been doing that. I have 6 albums, all of which I adore, all of them. And they're all progressive rock albums. So if they wanted to move and create a new direction for them to go in, I more than support that. And I think they do a good job here. And I respect, like, this band doing this, it takes balls, just because you have an audience that's very rooted in the mid 2000s and the sort of prog rock revival, and these fans expect a very certain kind of music and a very certain kind of structure. And you're saying a lot when your willingness to sort of throw that away doesn't come before the fact that you just want to make music that you're interested in. And that showcases spectacularly on stuff like Black Light Shine, which I think has a wonderful sort of dancey groove to it. I think that Graveyard Love is kind of this feels sort of like a lost cut from Octahedron, but if it was filtered through a kind of psychedelic pop lens. I think that Shore Story is something that's like kind of weird and mysterious sounding. And I also like some of the stuff on the back half here, like No Case Gain or Collapsible Shoulders, or even the finale of the record, The Requisition. But I can't deny a lot of the back half here feels like it's sort of jam-packed with the more half-formed ideas of the record. And it makes it a little bit more difficult to just sort of witness 2.5 minutes of a cool Mars Volta song that is suddenly over as soon as you sort of understand what it's going for and where it starts. And so it's a frustrating place to be in, and I understand why this album's got the reception that it does, but I'm simultaneously frustrated with it because I don't feel like people have unpacked their thoughts on it or have tried to treat this like the new direction that it is, because they're just prog. I wanted something that sounded like Francis the Mute again, because this fan base has been fickle ever since Octahedron. So it's difficult to grapple with. And I know I'm not the only one who thinks that, but I simultaneously really love what they're doing in theory and only really like it in practice.
Just a couple of things. For starters,
No.
I'm not like I want to address a couple of things you brought up to do with
Silence.
the fan base and people's expectations. What's been really telling about looking at the reception to this record to me is how much of what people like about the Mars Volta, or seem to have always liked about the Mars Volta, is rooted less in musicianship and more in aesthetics. Because a lot of people, and I'm not pointing fingers at any individuals in particular, it's obviously not any of us, but when a lot of people online,
You hear
talk
that
about,
word better than you.
when a lot of people online talk about what they like about the Mars Volta, or no, more tellingly, when they talk about what they don't like about this record, and also Noctahedron, also Nocturnicate to a certain extent as well. When they talk about that, it's quite telling, because, and look, I get the whole not enjoying the sound pivot, whatever, fine. But what people like about the Mars Volta has a lot less to do with musicianship and a lot more to do with aesthetics. People like the idea of, and again, I know I'm doing a straw man thing here and I don't mean to do it. I'm not talking about everyone, but let's address this style of criticism then rather than a person. People like this idea of the noodly, intense, bizarro, whacked out, weirdo, long run times, jammy, jam band, prog, whatever, blah thing, because it's excessive, it's insane. It's something that is so captivating because of how just incomprehensible it can be. It's in some ways, to a certain extent. You get so blindsided by the sheer ridiculousness of it all that it's hard not to fall for that if you're privy to that kind of thing. But the thing about this new album is, to me, this is every bit as musically complex as any other Mars Volta record. Plus, I would say it's every bit as progressive, if we're talking about what progressive actually means in a musical sense. Like, this is doing things that is progressive music is combining sounds, combining aesthetics from various established long-running genres, essentially, to create a hybrid, to create something that brings musical stylings together to explore to kind of broaden the frontiers and limits of what's considered tasteful execution of those things and what's considered normal in terms of the way that those aesthetics and sounds and signifiers are pieced together. And so in that sense, this is a prog album. This is absolutely a prog album. It's a prog pop album. You can call it what you want: prog pop, art pop, psychedelic pop, Latin rock, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I think this is every bit as much of a prog rock album as it is an R&B record. Like, you could call it a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, what it is it is Cedric and Omar flexing and exercising their incredibly talented abilities at composition and at musical structure and at, you know, wizardry in terms of musical performance as well. And doing those things in a way that hones that style to fit a new aesthetic, essentially. And people don't like the new aesthetic, or people have problems with the new aesthetic. They like these progressive tendencies when they're dressed up in, you know, 30-minute run times where ideas pile on top of each other and then circle back to one another and then kind of fold into each other and do all these sorts of things. They don't like the idea of an idea being executed and then being moved on from. And I'm not, again, I'm not attacking your version of this criticism, Jake, because I understand where you're coming from. But to me, the idea of exploring an idea or presenting an idea and then moving on to the next one is kind of what I like about this record, rather than what's a shortcoming of it. And again, my experience with it. Full disclosure, I love this album. I think that this is a really exciting record that has really invigorated me in terms of thinking about what I like about Cedric and Omar and what they do and what I like about the Mars Volta in general, and kind of challenging a lot of those pre-established notions of what they do best, and doing a lot of things that I think it's like they take little elements that are kind of thrown in as window dressing on longer songs on records like Francis the Mutant and Butexture. Take those elements, take them out, and they're no longer window dressing. They are the song now. And that is quite exciting to me, especially because I think a lot of the little things that they add into some of those longer pieces can be really, really interesting and can complement a lot of what else is going on really, really nicely, but also can be things that I like or find appealing, the idea of the band zeroing in on those things. And I think they do that really, really potently in songs like Black Lights Shine, Blank Condolences, Cerulean, which is another one of my absolute favorites on here, where you get like, it's almost it almost is a straightforward sort of like synthetic R&B-esque pop song, essentially. And Cedric fits that mold, I think, really, really well. Palm Full of Crux is another case. Tourmaline, to me, is like classic Mars Volta. Like, it feels like almost every album has a song where it's like the, you know, the ballad sort of song where Cedric is kind of doing these sort of longing sort of tones and sort of melding in between, like making his voice kind of melt into the guitar to a certain extent, like he does on that track. I think the record kind of, it has this sure patchwork sort of almost like mixtape or DJ mix sensibility to it, where it's like it is this jam that's evolving in real time and it's heading in all these bizarre directions. But when it is approached, like August said, as this kind of holistic single piece of music, if you want to approach it like that, and view all these constituent parts as, you know, sections that are building up this single whole, then it starts to be a much more satisfying release, I think, than just breaking it down on a track by track level, especially when you get to the final stretch of songs, which I think are all fantastic. There are a few moments on here that don't quite land for me the way that I would like them to. Songs like Shore Story and Flash Burns from Flashbacks, I would say, are maybe moments where the musical ideas don't captivate me as much. But generally speaking, I find the daringness of songs like Vigil and Cerulean, No Case Gain as well, to be really, really exciting. And I think that if these ideas, individual song ideas, were fleshed out to a longer length, I don't know how much patience I would actually even have with them in this context. I think that the way that these elements have been recontextualized into this short format is kind of like almost the best way to take them in to a certain extent, because if you start fleshing them out into something longer and bigger and more sort of manifold, then you just start to approximate something more along the lines of what they have already done, or you start to exhaust ideas beyond what, because again, a lot of these songs like Vigil, Cerulean, Palm Full of Crux, Tourmaline, if these songs were longer, they wouldn't work as well, I don't think. So that's where I come from on those. And yeah, it's a really like slightly seductive record as well. Like, it sounds amazing. Like, it sounds like a fucking $1,000,000. I don't know that they've ever had a record that is produced with the sheer just luxurious sound that this has. And that also feels like a thing that is very refreshing for them, because especially their last few records, they've all sounded great, but not in a way that this sounds great, in a way where they are so densely packed. I guess Octahedron accepted, but that's still a different aesthetic. But a lot of their later records are so densely packed that the maximalism becomes the appeal, if you can get into that. Whereas here, I like the way the band kind of flirt with a more minimalist style, with a more like purposefulness to the placement of every single element in these songs. And yeah, so that's generally how I enjoy the record. I don't think it's, you know, a masterpiece. I don't think that it is flawless either. There are moments that I still haven't quite gelled with as much, but I do find it a satisfying listen from front to back personally. And I think that it benefits from an open mind. I think that it benefits from being able to assess and try and remove yourself from some of your expectations for the Mars Volta, or for what you want them to be, or for what they even are to you. You know, it's really weird. It's really weird. Obviously, obvious Latin connection here, but the record this reminds me the most of, the record this year that I think this has the most in common with, is definitely Rosalia's Motomami, which has a very similar structure, flirts with ideas in a very similar way that what this does. And if you were to tell me at the start of this year that, you know, I would be comparing the new Mars Volta album to Rosalia, I would be like, I mean, sure, they're the Latin, and
Well,
but are you sure? Are you what? Huh?
Well, I think the way I'd react if you told me that as at the start of the year is, there's a new Mars Volta album.
Yeah. I mean, I've said basically all I have to say about it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed on this very particular level.
If
that-
I can sort of add to something that I said, because
Yeah,
I don't want to I've been trying to figure out how to phrase this entire week, is that I don't want to give the impression that I just want these songs to be longer. The album that this reminds me of, at least in terms of how I engage with it and how it both frustrates and excites me, is this to me is the Mars Volta's Amnesiac. This is an album that sort of thrives on being on those peripheral ideas that Riley talked about, and making fully formed songs out of those kind of ideas, and then kind of smushing everything together to be a more holistic kind of vibe. And then as a result, I have very similar problems with them, and that I feel like they tread the ground of not feeling like they're fully realized, or also just feeling like, oh, this is an interstitial moment that serves as a more, you know, transitional moment between the track list. But are some of these songs that, or are they not fully formed ideas, and I don't know where one begins and
Sure.
one ends? And I don't want these songs to be longer, but I feel like, if anything else, and if we can look at it in the sort of big picture spectacle of the sense of the word, this is a great blueprint, because if they elaborate on this specific sound, I think they can fine tune it and progress from here and find what works about it, and then elaborate upon it in maybe ways that aren't more traditional, but ways that I feel like play to the band's existing strengths a bit better. I will say I agree with the production. However, there is one problem I have. I like how colorful and lush and occasionally very spacious it is. I don't particularly care for the vocal mixing here. It's very, very front and center. And a lot of the times it feels like you hear Cedric's vocals and they kind of wash out some of the elements of the instrumentation. And I think Cedric sounds great. I think his vocal performances are good, but there is sometimes some things that are lost when I'm just like reaching for the instrumental ideas in these songs that are occasionally a bit swept to the side. So it is good. It sounds great. That one particular choice does not work for me.
Yeah, fair enough.
No, I'm definitely with you about the vocals just being a little too loud. Although I might even take it a step further myself and say that I think Cedric's voice is obviously not what it used to be. And, you know, that's inherent with age, you know, a decade passing. But for me, it does come off a little more distracting than maybe it does for some other people, because when I read into this album, and I kind of consider its lyrical content, we've got a deeply furious, angry album, just like most of Volta's records in the past. And where this doesn't quite land for me is precisely in that anger, because it's been a long time since Cedric and Omar were coked up teenagers just banging out the loudest, most fucking aggressive punk and prog rock songs ever. And I think that time shows in some unfortunate places. Like I think the opening, like I think Black Light Shine is a song where the vocals are very inconsistent in terms of performance. Like I really love towards the end of that song where he's really harmonizing with the guitar and it feels like the groove of the song is just right. But towards the beginning, I'm a little off put by some of the weird tones he's going for, and it just felt like something where I could picture Cedric in 2005 2006 doing this same song but it having a completely different level of energy and performance. And I would be lying if I said that didn't distract me a lot throughout the record. Clearly with time, Volta have toned their set, or I guess Cedric and Omar have toned their sound a little more towards Cedric's newer style of vocal delivery. And there are moments where that is an admirable effort on here. But there are times where I think it is still a little awkward and feels like they're not quite sure of how these songs should come across, how the energy, how the flow should come across. And little moments like that on the album are not major on their own, but distracting collectively, would be some of my thoughts.
Morgan, what do you think?
Okay, so I'll say at the outset, I didn't listen to any of the singles for this album and the build up to it. The idea of Mars Volta singles is funny to me.
It's very funny.
Sort of inherently. I it's just something I did not want to get caught up in a hype cycle of. I just wanted to distance myself from it in the build up and then just attack it for what it was. So I'll go ahead and also say that I think this is the worst Mars Volta album. And I will also say that the only thing I think on here that I would say is bad is unfortunately Vigil. I like that. I think that song has a handful of interesting hooks, and none of them work well together at all, really. They sort of bounce back and forth between each other in a way that I find jarring and incohesive and unsatisfying to listen to. But I think the album, generally speaking, otherwise, is clear of these issues. But most of the rest of it also has issues of its own, in that, yes, I would not say that I want any of these songs to be longer, but I do want plenty of them to be more. So now that I have that out of the way, I will say that I do think this is a good record. It sounds great. I think I would not say that Cedric's voice sounds any worse. I just think it is different, and that's okay. I think they've adjusted the music accordingly. Omar is doing so many interesting things in terms of the production and instrumentation on this album. The thing is as dense as any of their previous collaborations, whether that be Drive-In or Volta. And I think this is something that's going to get more and more rewarding as time goes on and you spend more time with it, much like pretty much every Mars Volta album.
What kills me about this album is that it's just there's just sort of a refusal to evaluate this for both what it is and like there's just the standards of what you're holding this to, just they feel very misapplied. I think that this is a good sound for the band. And I also think that we need to take into consideration that Morgan said something very true here, is that in my experience, every Mars Volta album is a grower. I've had to sit with these albums for months before I could come down on definitive conclusions on all of them. And I've always liked all of them more after time. So that's an important consideration to sort of put at play here. But I also think that like Riley's comment on the way that this is a progressive album is totally true. That like in spirit, this is every bit as Cedric and Omar as everything they've ever made. And I just feel like they're drawing from things that are a little bit less mainstream and a little less suited to what their fans want. And I don't know, it kills me to see people who celebrate music that is so dynamic and interesting and idiosyncratic reject something that is also dynamic and interesting and idiosyncratic, even if it's not quite as successful. It's like calling it the worst Mars Volta album for me feels like this misses the mark. For me, this is maybe the least successful Mars Volta album. The worst feels wrong. It feels misapplied.
I just think like the whole conversation around these kinds of things is just like, it's not the way I'd approach this. Like,
and
we have another Mars Volta album that we didn't have, weeks ago. And it's like, if you don't like it that much, fine. But like, it's kind of cool that it exists.
Here's something I want to pose, because this is an idea I've been thinking about for a long time with relation to this album, especially with the rollout of the singles, is that should this have been branded as a Mars Volta album?
Because I also wanted to pose that question.
So I'm glad you did.
I've gone back and forth on this question, actually, just because they have had interstitial projects like Bosnian Rainbows and Anti-Mask, projects I like a lot. And at first, I probably would have said no, just because I feel like it would have warmed people up reception-wise to it. Like, I think undoubtedly if the Mars Volta's name wasn't on here, that this would be received better. I don't think that it would be like bolded or anything, but that 2.7 would probably be more like a 3.15 or something.
Maybe
like, it would
maybe a 3.2 something.
Yeah, exactly. I think people would be open-minded enough. But and now that I'm done with it, I'm glad they didn't, because frankly, it is in the spirit of this band. And also, frankly, if they want to call it a Mars Volta album, they should damn well do that if they want to. That's the point of the band that they said. That's what they said, is that like the idea of an outside force controlling us sounds like government. And that quote has stuck with me ever since. That feels really silly.
And I think it also I think what this album also forces so many people to do is go back and reanalyze projects that are not under the Mars Volta umbrella, like Anti-Mask or Bosnian Rainbows. We could create a theoretical world where those are just other Mars Volta albums, because really the only constant throughout Cedric and Omar's career has been one another. Cedric and Omar, it is the duo of the two that has made and shaped their career. So it's almost, it's weird to me that even groups like At the Drive-In and the Mars Volta are branded separately, because this is all a continuation of one singular narrative of two men's career. And really the branding, I think the name up front has conditioned people to have an expectation that was going to be unrealistic from the word go. Let's be real.
I mean, I'll just say this, as a fan of both musicians, I find it satisfying to hear what is fascinating them and motivating them and driving them musically and creatively.
Absolutely.
And if I don't completely get on board with that, then that's not even the point, right? The point is to see where a person's or people's creative drives, instincts, passions are at a given moment in time. And have that be a continuing part of the tapestry or narrative of their creative development, right? Just see where, what are Cedric and Omar, like what motivates them, what makes them passionate, what gets their creative drive going.
Absolutely. And I think of them like wrestlers, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Wrestlers, because I think professional wrestling is a very interesting method of delivering a story, because matches are less about the choreography of the fights and more about the evolution of the characters through that fighting, but there's also weird interstitial stuff between that, and it's all a constructed narrative in a way that sports can only try to replicate. And the Mars Volta are very much a band who follow that same principle of, no matter what character they're playing, whether it's the Mars Volta or at the drive-in anti-mask, etc., wrestlers in different companies, if you will, they are always the same core people with these same interests driving them. And yeah, that's the fun, Riley. That's exactly what you're saying. That's what Jake's saying. That's what Morgan's saying. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We're cutting a fucking promo on people who don't get this. Motherfuckers.
We've talked about an album that I feel like is highly comparable to this in all ways, except for the fact that it wasn't really a shift in sound. But to me, this album has a similar appeal to Porcupine Tree's The Incident, in that it's an album that you get to experience a bunch of really expert, tightly wound musicians kind of let their hair down and sort of make an album that feels like they're a little bit more relaxed, and they're a little bit more playing to a sensibility that feels a little bit looser, and that maybe not all of it comes together or is successful for you, but there is an appeal in hearing that, and there is a novelty in it that goes beyond just being like, oh, this is different. I don't think this is good because it's different. I think it's good because it's good. But I do think that there is a sort of special, like, again, the idea of them building off of this, if they want to, is an extremely interesting prospect for me. But if this is all we get, if this is the only Mars Volta album that's ever like this, cool, awesome. We have this little chapter of songs that work in this really weird kind of sweet-like manner, and I enjoy them, and I think they're well put together, if not always incredibly successful.
I think, as just to build off something you said, I think as comeback album for legendary 2000s prog act, there's an interesting dichotomy here with this enclosure continuation, right? There are two vastly different visions of how this kind of band, this kind of like sort of intense 2000s, modern progressive band can, revisit essentially their ideas and influences and motivations, essentially. And in the case of Porcupine Tree, make another record that is really, I think both records are great. Make another really strong record that does a lot of things really, really well that you have done in the past, dependably, right? Reliably do something that you're already really good at, or you can swing for the fences and really do something that completely recontextualizes a lot of your previous work. And I'm not saying one choice is better than the other, but there are definitely choices that are, I think what Mars Volta did is obviously riskier, but also slightly more interesting as well. Like, I'm grateful for Porcupine Tree's new record as well. I think it's awesome and really satisfying to listen to from front to back. But it's another great Porcupine Tree record. Yeah. Whereas I'm grateful that the Mars Volta have kind of done something that gives us a little bit of a counterpoint, or a little bit of a different version of that narrative, essentially, and showcases that, that not all, legendary, instrumentally proficient and beloved band reforming after lengthy hiatus has to be this formulaic pattern that always goes the same way, or that always, lands in the same ballpark. Like, I like that the Mars Volta have kind of thrown caution to the wind a little bit here and just sort of had fun. And the record is, though I think that the fun and jaunty nature of the music does form an interesting contrast with the rage that August mentioned that Cedric is very, like, characteristically him. that's an interesting contrast. It is fundamentally a ridiculously entertaining record to listen to. Like, it is just, it's doing stuff on a moment to moment basis that I think keeps you on your toes. Like, if you're particularly musically minded as well, it'll keep you like wanting to sort of pick apart what is happening at every given moment, and how these songs are built up. There's instrumentation and choices that are as bewildering and exciting and confusing as like moments that you would expect from every Mars Volta record up to this point as well. It's an album that will intellectually stimulate you, even if whether or not it appeals to your aesthetic preferences or not. It's a record that deserves, I think, a little bit more of a discerning touch and a little bit more of a thoughtful approach than what it's gotten, to be honest. But I mean,
I feel like
we've made that
that
point
explains our reaction to both of these albums too, is that I feel like Porcupine Tree and Mars Volta, it's not necessarily, oh, they came back with a good album. It's that they came back carrying the spirit of the band. It's just that Porcupine Tree's spirit was never to be super iterative and change things up after they had evolved and reached their final form, whereas the Mars Volta had always been iterating on themselves. I think that like the two closest albums in sound that they made were Amputecture and Francis the Mute, and those two albums have loads of differences that you can and that we did unpack. So it's just them, in many ways, it's them doing what they've always done.
Absolutely. All right, let's do our favorite tracks and ratings for the Mars Volta. We'll go reverse order this time. My 3 favorite tracks on the record are Blacklight Shine, I'm going to say Cerulean, and The Requisition. I mean, God, there's so many. I find myself really torn picking favorites on here because it is just so much of a singular experience for me. Least favorite moment, I guess, is Flash Burns from Flashbacks, but really it's not that distinct from the rest in terms of quality for me, and I'm going to give the album a 7.5. Morgan?
Yeah, 3 favorites: Graveyard Love, Blacklight Shine, and The Requisition. Least favorites, I already mentioned Vigil. Let's stick with that, and I will give this a 6 out of 10 overall.
3 favorites here: Blacklight Shine, The Requisition, and Cruella. All the ones Riley said.
Cruella?
Cerulean, yes, that's what I meant. Anyways, least favorite on here is probably Vigil. Also, I'm not rating. I don't know, quite frankly.
You don't have to. That's actually a good point.
I think I am going to abstain because, as has been established, this is my favorite fucking band. I've only had a week with this. I don't know if I had to give a range, like 6, 8 area, somewhere in there. Who knows? Fuck it.
I completely support this. I'm gonna say my 3 favorite songs on here won't stray from the pack. I'll say Blacklight Shine. I'm gonna say No Case Gain. I really like that song, and most people don't for whatever reason. And maybe The Requisition. Least favorite on here, I'll say I kind of like Vigil. I'll say my least favorite's actually Que Dios te maldiga mi corazón, just because I just want that. I look, this is the only time I will make this complaint. This song just does need to be longer. Like, it's 1:50 and it's awesome, but I think it would benefit from like at least an extra 40 seconds because it's badass. I'm going to give it a 6.5 because, like August, I feel like it's going to land within a particular area for me. So an interstitial kind of score suits it the best.
All right. Gives us an average overall of 6.8 for the Mars Volta. Let us know at home what you think of any of the albums we've discussed today. The new records from the Mars Volta, Death Cab for Cutie, the Beths, and Rina Sawayama. We want to hear from you in the comments below. We'll be back next week with more new releases, new albums, new discussions. Plus, as I mentioned at the top of this episode, we have a record club coming out on Queens of the Stone Age's Songs for the Deaf 2, plus the continuation of our national retrospective. So lots coming in the pipeline. We hope that you'll stick around and join us. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving a like, subscribing to the channel if you have not already, and of course, leaving us a comment below with your thoughts on any of these records or anything you would like us to talk about in the future. If you want to go above and beyond and support us directly, you can hit the join button, and for just $1 a month, you can support us, become a member of the Jams and Tea family, get your name featured in the title crawl of every video on this channel. Plus, if you want to recommend us something to listen to, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. August, take us home.
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago. The 2008 Obama presidential campaign. Fuck you.
I don't think that's what he said.